Story 1. I was bullied relentlessly for years in school. It destroyed what little confidence I had and damaged my trust in people. I still don't fully trust anyone and keep most relationships at a distance in case they go south and I need to cut them from my life. As a result of the bullying, I am fiercely independent and can happily live alone. I've never felt loneliness, which allows me to be myself around others. If they don't like me, they can leave, and I won't miss them. Kids can be unkind. Story 2. I thought for a long time that my cold, abusive, unloving mother had negatively impacted my life. Then I had a child of my own and was surprised that we bonded immediately. She's now a teenager and a challenge at times, but I can only feel gratitude and appreciation for the lovely, good-natured, sweet, and funny adult she's becoming. I suppose my mother didn't affect me too negatively after all. Story 3. Being molested as a child has had a lasting impact. Years of talk therapy and medication have helped me improve my well-being. Story 4. My brother and his friends restrained me to a bed and did terrible things to me. It has affected me deeply, and now my preferences revolve around these experiences as a way to cope. Story 5. Losing my mother when I was 10 years old to stage 4 cancer was devastating. Seeing her slowly lose herself and so much weight was heartbreaking. She went from being a healthy, happy mother to a malnourished and sick one. In her final days, she was in hospice care. My dad came to get me, crying, and told me I needed to see my mom. When I entered the room, her sister and my cousins were all crying. Her body lay there, lifeless, with her hands purple and blue. I felt numb. I didn't cry. Instead, I brushed her hair for about 2 hours. When they came to take her body, my cousin took me to get ice cream so I wouldn't have to witness that. I was so young and blind to what was happening. I miss her so much. Story 6. I experienced chronic hives for a year, covering my body with unexplained welts that shifted daily. I was extremely itchy, gained 20 pounds from steroids, lost half my hair due to stress, and took up to 14 antihistamines a day. I struggled to sleep and disliked being touched. As a result, my husband had an affair. Eventually, I found an exceptional immunologist who put me on a specific medication, and the hives have never returned. However, the entire experience traumatized me. Story 7. My son had suicidal thoughts, notes, and plans from last summer. Every night, I think about this and how horrific it would have been had he gone through with it. My sweet boy. Story 8. Losing my daughter in a car accident will likely affect me for the rest of my life. Story 9. Oh my God, do I win something? Neglectful and abusive parents. Molested at 7. Extreme bullying. Unmonitored access to the internet at 11. Groomed at 13. Slept with too many people as a teenager. My groomer made me commit crimes. Raped at 21. Stalked for a year by my rapist. I didn't think I had value outside of sex for a long time. I still feel that sometimes, but I'm working on it. When I reach 10 years without serious trauma at the end of this year, I am going to have a celebration. An I win party. Story 10. Surviving a school shooting in 2023. I miss attending school without fear. I miss who I was, and I miss the professors whose lives were taken so abruptly. Story 11. I am a truck driver, and a 54-year-old man collided with a car while riding a motorcycle in front of me. I jumped out of my truck and was on the phone with emergency services while trying to check his pulse. He was not breathing, had no pulse, and blood was coming from everywhere. The operator asked if I could perform CPR, but the man was missing half of his face. I remember talking to him as he started gasping for breath and then died. Story 12. Finding out that my mother trafficked me as a child was shocking. I always knew what I experienced. I just didn't know she orchestrated and videotaped it for money. Initially, I felt some shock, but I am grateful it didn't lead to self-pity or self-hatred. Instead, it awakened a very intense side of me and reminded me of who I can be, despite working for decades to conceal that part and present a meek and proper image. Let's just say, I don't think it's normal to listen to Eminem's Kim and imagine it's the story of you and your disabled little sister whom you raised while your mother faces the consequences. Story 13. Being attacked and assaulted has deeply affected me. Each time I was hurt, a part of my former self faded away. I miss her and wish I could have kept her safe. Story 14. Eczema significantly stunted my emotional growth and affected my personality. While all the kids around me grew up in an innocent world, I learned early on that life could be cruel. Story 15. Taking Cymbalta for depression led to discontinuation, resulting in erectile dysfunction, a complete loss of sex drive, a total loss of emotion, reduced cognitive ability, and various other issues. Story 16. Emotional abuse from my mother and sexual abuse during my childhood. I did not realize I was sexually abused until I had therapy in my 20s. I used to believe it happened to me because I did not say no. Story 17. Childhood sexual abuse. For years, I believed it didn't affect me and wasn't a big deal, but now that I'm older, I see I'm no different than any other survivor. I do indeed have issues that I will have to deal with for the rest of my life. Story 18. Working as a healthcare professional in a hospital during the COVID pandemic was more stressful than dealing with my mother's suicide 2 weeks after my wedding. That speaks volumes. Story 19. I worked hard in 2020 doing web design and video for a company to keep them afloat. In 2021, the CEO promoted her close friends to be my creative directors and instruct me on what to do. I refused to accept that. I was released from the company, which immediately collapsed. Now, at over 50, it is tough to find good work, especially in the creative field. I may have to consider working in retail or bartending soon. Story 20. I had a best friend in high school and college. He was the first person I ever felt was my equal. Someone who made me feel like the most important person in his life. We were incredibly close and did everything together. I could never have imagined that he would not be in my life. Felt like it was going to be that way for the rest of my life. However, after college, he moved away, got married, and had children. I tried to stay in contact, but weeks turned into months, and eventually years went by without any responses. The last time I saw him was almost exactly 20 years ago, and it broke my heart forever. Story 21. Being taken from my mother due to neglect and witnessing her endure an abusive relationship with my father led to a traumatic situation where she later dated a man who sexually assaulted me. When my father discovered this, he killed him in front of me. After entering foster care, I was placed with a family that my caseworker described as a good family, only to be sexually assaulted by my foster father and his friends for money. Story 22. During elementary school, a group of my male friends tricked me into a dark stairwell and undressed me. They made fun of my private parts and called me overweight. They spread rumors about it. I spent the rest of my school days eating lunch in the bathroom. Story 23. Witnessing a church van full of teenagers and young adults roll over and eject nearly all of the passengers onto the highway. Not many survived. Story 24. My nephew drowned when I was 13, and he was 2. That experience really shaped how I treated the world, poorly. My bad attitude mixed with alcohol resulted in me wrecking my car and killing my friend. That event profoundly affected me. Then I went to prison, which was difficult. After prison, I was okay for a decade until PTSD and depression hit. That really changed me. Losing my best friend to suicide in 2022 made me numb. However, I am hopeful for tomorrow. Story 25. It's interesting to read this. About 4 years ago, I encountered the same question and answered very differently. I was forced into mental institutions as a teenager in America. Some of them, I would argue most of them, were terrible. They didn't damage me permanently, but they changed me forever. Ultimately, I wouldn't be who I am today without that experience. However, I struggled significantly for 7 years afterward. Story 26. I had a friend who sexually abused me when we were both children. People often don't talk about child-on-child sexual abuse, but it is extremely common. I tried to forget it happened because my mind suppressed the memory, but the effects began to show around middle school. I started to slowly remember what occurred, and it significantly impacted how I engage in friendships, relationships, and boundaries. I have sought therapy for it, but I wish I had started sooner. Story 27. My brother died when I was 6 years old. The only image that remains in my mind today is the day I saw him connected to machines in his hospital bed. The saddest part is that I may not be the most traumatized in my family. My father likely endured the most pain, as he succumbed to cancer while engaged in a conversation with my brother. Story 28. I had a 9-year-old girl die in my arms after I pulled her out of a burning car. I always experience flashbacks from it, and I had just turned 17 the month before. Story 29. A narcissistic mother is challenging. We often criticize narcissists, but unless you have been raised by one, you may not realize how much it can affect your self-image, even long after you have cut them out of your life. Story 30. I need to believe I can recover from everything that has happened to me. Otherwise, I cannot survive. Story 31. Knowing that the priest convicted of child molestation had caused significant harm to people I knew before I, along with another child, reported him and ensured he was removed again. Could I have done anything? Not really, but the survivor's guilt continues to affect me. Story 32. No one believed me when my uncle tried to stay with us, and my mom allowed him to live with us. Giving birth to my son was almost fatal for me. Story 33. I was molested by someone I trusted, and my family did not want me to speak out because it would be an embarrassment to them. Story 34. One day, during a random curiosity spree, I learned how casinos manipulate individuals with specific sounds, lights, the placement of bathrooms, and the music played. I fell into a rabbit hole learning about the psychology behind these tactics. I began noticing these techniques everywhere. I see the tricks in commercials and advertisements, understand the choice of certain words for specific products, and recognize why particular smells and seemingly insignificant details are chosen. I realized how these elements can trigger certain responses in the brain without conscious awareness, all to lure individuals into purchasing or engaging with something. It may sound trivial, but it feels like torture to me. It's a real once you see it, you can't unsee it situation. I can't help but see the manipulation and lures in everyday life, which is frustrating. Events like carnivals, arcades, and even some stores have become unsettling to me, and I fixate on how all of it operates. It's quite depressing, and while it may not seem severe, it has drained some magic from my perception of the world, replacing it with an unpleasant understanding. This awareness has also led me to other paths that have ruined many enjoyable experiences. I've started learning to look beyond this, but I know I will never see things the same way. Often, I wish I had never learned about it. Story 35. Sexually abused as a child. Bottling it up for 20 years was not the right choice. I ended up having seizures, hearing voices, and experiencing a very difficult time. A 20-year buildup of trauma can lead to psychosis. Story 36. Losing 4 people in 18 months and watching my grandfather rapidly decline as multiple myeloma dissolved the vertebrae in his neck has been very difficult. I was the first to find my childhood dog, who was with me from the age of 10 to 22. Extremely ill on his last night with us because I could sense something was wrong before I even saw him. Despite experiencing all of this, my family mainly expresses sympathy for the other family members and how hard it must be for them. Story 37. I was hit by an 18-wheeler on the highway while stopped on the interstate, waiting for traffic to move during the morning rush hour. It is believed that the driver fell asleep due to exhaustion and driving too long, hitting me at 70 miles per hour. My car was stuck on the front of the tractor before it turned, plowing into 5 other vehicles, and I was ran over and crushed under the rig. The interstate was closed for 6 hours due to the intense damage. I feel fortunate to be here and share this story. Post-traumatic stress disorder has become my new lifelong companion. Truly changed me. Story 38. Religion haunts me daily and affects my life more than I desire. I'm not as open about it as I would like to be. Story 39. My father used to lock me in closets as a young child because I was afraid of the dark. He found it amusing when I would scream and cry, telling me that monsters were in there with me. This was just the beginning of his amusement with my pain and fear. I am now 37 years old, and I have had some beautiful memories and experiences. I am proud of the ways I have found to exist, but I still struggle to feel safe even when everything is fine. Many nights, I end up shaking in the bathtub. I am still trying, still fighting to teach myself that it's okay. I tell myself, I am listening to you, and I will keep you safe. It is such a struggle, but I am not going to give up on her. I love you all. I really do. So many brave souls. Story 40. Being told by an ex that I deserve to die, but I am not worth the bullet it would take to kill me hurts worse than being abandoned at 5 in the backseat of a car by my abusive mother and adopted by abusive grandparents. That one sentence has affected me for life. Story 41. My parents divorced when I was 12. It distorted my understanding of love. I have struggled with severe depression and low self-esteem ever since. Story 42. Inoperable central brain vertigo. My body feels like it is in a constant spin, making it difficult to balance, and I see everything rotating even when I sleep. I also experience constant nausea and vomiting from it. This has been ongoing for 10 years. Story 43. Getting diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder was challenging for me. I struggled significantly in school, particularly with learning German, despite my family being from Germany. I had many difficulties completing homework on time. After finishing high school, things improved, but only slightly. Story 44. Endometriosis has profoundly affected who I am as a person, both mentally and physically. Story 45. I tried to put myself in a box last year, and now my perception of myself and others has changed significantly. I am not the same person anymore. Story 46. Being in college, my sorority sister's dad covered it up and pretended it didn't happen. They kicked me out because I became extremely depressed, and no one was helping me. Story 47. Being born into a family that never wanted children is difficult. Children do not fix broken relationships, and my mother never took the time to heal from her past miscarriages and stillbirths. As a result, she struggled to have a relationship with me while forming connections with others instead. It took 3 days of other parents pointing out that my situation was not normal before she finally scheduled a doctor's appointment for me. It turned out I had fractured my leg in the same spot where I had placed a bandage. The doctors even chuckled when they noticed the square mark left by the adhesive on the X-ray surrounding the fracture. I only received stitches and medical care when others urged her to take action. They would say, "That's not normal. You need to take your son to the doctor. He has been unwell for 3 days, lying around like a corpse. You can take him or I will." It seems it's finally time to schedule an appointment. Story 48. I stayed with a cheater for 7 years because he said he would change and I wanted to fix him. It's hard for me to believe when someone says, "I love you," and actually means it. My father's affair and my parents' divorce showed me that no one stays forever, and getting hurt is inevitable. Story 49. Temporal lobe epilepsy was diagnosed at age 12. It has affected me significantly for 23 years, and it is a long story. Story 50. Having my 24-year-old daughter die in my arms is an eternally painful wound. I will never recover. The post-traumatic stress disorder and flashbacks alone tear me apart. Story 51. My mom shared a horrible family history when I was in the 5th grade. She allowed men to use my body in exchange for drugs while she watched me being violated. Story 52. Childhood sexual abuse and growing up with an abusive brother have affected me. Now I am with an abusive partner to whom I have been trauma bonded for the past 13 years. Story 53. Take your pick. Warning: trauma dump. Being molested as a young child by my father. Listening to my father assault my mother. Burying my kitten alive on my 6th birthday because my dad was intoxicated. Coming home to my mother's suicide attempt as a young girl. Losing my virginity to assault and being told no man will ever want to hold me again. Walking in on my brother's suicide attempt at age 8. Watching my parents fight violently and having to flee to the neighbors with my friend to call for help. Being taken in the middle of the night to a stranger's house. Having a stranger break into our home in the middle of the night. Burning our stuffed animals so we would have heat. Add that to the constant verbal, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. I'm now very hypervigilant. Everything makes me jump. I wake up in a start when my partner walks into the room. I have put bells on every door so I am alerted when someone is coming or going. I have a variety of documented disorders that I won't go into. I experience consistent flashbacks, but they are not as intense as they used to be. However, I cannot engage in real intimacy with my partner without first experiencing a significant flashback and breaking down. I scream in my sleep frequently and have many nightmares, but I am in a much better place than I used to be. I no longer self-harm. I am fairly empathetic and I still love people and believe in their goodness. Story 54. My dad was a hitter and a southpaw. He gave me too many concussions and now I have 50% hearing loss in my right ear, and my sense of balance is compromised. Story 55. Losing my dad to drugs, losing my stepdad to a pornography addiction, and then losing my mom to drugs. My life contains a lot of loss. Story 56. Being molested by my dad. Not the acts themselves, but the fallout of telling on him. My mom let him stay in the house. I was sent to a program in Utah and blamed her for keeping him in the house after I told her what he had done. I was scared it was my fault. I guess it's still my fault she let him stay. Story 57. Losing my dad to dementia, then my only brother to suicide, then my daughter's father to drowning, and finally my mother to cancer, all within 3 years and 4 months, has been incredibly difficult. I don't know if I will ever feel the same as I did before they all passed away. It has been 3 years since my mom died. She was the last one to go, and I still cry painfully most days. I just wonder if I will ever feel okay again. Story 58. Discovering that my former gym teacher was having relationships with students, though I was not one of them, significantly hurt my self-esteem and confidence. Story 59. Being sent to a special school when I didn't belong there ruined every aspect of my life. My social life, career, and relationships changed my life completely. Story 60. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is often misunderstood, and I faced challenges such as poor nonverbal communication and impulse control during high school in a conservative region where personal accountability was rarely enforced. With little parental guidance on how to handle mistreatment, I felt dehumanized and overwhelmed. I struggled to understand my identity, and the situation became so distressing that I eventually stopped attending school and was expelled midway through my first year. I retreated for the next 7 years, avoiding school, relationships, and driving, and only occasionally taking on short-term jobs. It has taken decades for me to confront and process the experiences and behaviors that affected me and others. Story 61. Someone hit my dog on purpose. The saddest part is that someone first abandoned him, and we took him in. 2 years later, someone intentionally ran him over. He was dying for 30 minutes, and no one helped him. I wasn't there. I learned of it 2 days later when someone took the body, and the last time I saw him was when I was looking for photos of him to make posters. I didn't need that. Story 62. My dad left and came back multiple times, finding me on MySpace 12 years later. My mom married someone new and completely changed, leaving me out of her new family. Story 63. My mom died when I was 10. It didn't ruin the rest of my life, but it sure affected the 20 years that followed. Story 64. I allowed myself to heal and then met someone I felt completely in love with, only to end up being ghosted. This is going to affect me for a long time. He came into my life after I healed and then did the same thing to me. But I have healed before, and I learned to love again. I will have to find the strength within myself to get through this once more. I never anticipated letting this one go. It's really impacting me in a way that no previous rejection has. Story 65. I was taken advantage of when I was very young. My mother scolded me when she learned about it. Since then, I have struggled to fully trust her and have developed issues with trust and vulnerability. Story 66. I had a stroke when I was 28, followed by learning to walk again and heart surgery, all within months of each other. It was the most painful experience I have ever had, physically, mentally, and emotionally. After months of physical therapy, I learned to do some of the most basic things in life all over again. It took many small steps and several discouraging days, but I made it. Story 67. The realization that the memory I have been replaying in my head for 40 years was real and that I needed to accept it. I was sexually assaulted as a child by family members. It has profoundly impacted my life. Story 68. Depression, apathy, and boredom did not help. They turned my mild discomfort into significant distress and corrupted my mind, making me an angry, miserable, and bitter person. Story 69. Being bullied, assaulted by a close friend, and having an absent father has made me feel left out. My trust and love are now very limited. Story 70. I stayed in a relationship with a narcissist who almost harmed me one night after visiting me at work. He became angry because I did not greet him enthusiastically when he arrived. He nearly strangled me and threatened me with a gun before driving away in a rage. I severed all contact from that day forward. He destroyed my phone that same night and never paid the full amount. I just needed that final push to leave. Story 71. My stepfather was abusive and would harm my mother. There were times when we were homeless. They struggled with substance abuse. Before my stepfather, my mother had many negative influences around her. I witnessed and heard a lot of it. Even now, at 33 years old, I continue to see a psychiatrist and a therapist. I spent my 20s drinking and only started to truly live my life when I turned 29. Much of my memory is hazy, but sometimes I recall specific events with vivid clarity. I once broke his nose, which felt satisfying, but before I reached adulthood, my attempts to stand up for myself and my mother often ended badly. My entire childhood was traumatic. Although I might have ended up in jail, I have developed a strong sense of empathy, which prevents me from acting on the violent tendencies instilled in me during my upbringing. I have a wife and child who do not see the environment I grew up in. However, I struggle frequently and often feel unstable. I try my best. I have a good job and have learned valuable skills from the damage I experienced, which I use every day. That's my story. Story 72. I moved teams internally due to a malicious manager who has ruined the careers of two other people since I left. I performed extremely well on my new team, and my new manager wanted to promote me. However, she left for a month-long vacation. An envious senior colleague stole a project design from me that she had previously rejected. I was sent on a wild goose chase for a month, forced to work all-nighters most days of the week. The colleague lied to my manager when she returned and took credit for my accomplishments. My manager wouldn't defend me, so I quit on the spot. I was supposed to receive $15,000 in restricted stock units, but I left it behind on principle. 2 days later, someone broke into my apartment and then into my truck. The truck was so badly damaged that it was considered a biohazard. I had to fix everything myself because the insurance wouldn't evaluate it for 2 months. I spent a month going back and forth with insurance and the local police. I sold nearly everything I owned and moved back to New York City. I am currently rebuilding my life. Story 73. Aborting my baby when I didn't want it was heartbreaking. I wanted that baby more than anything. It's my dream to be a mother and give my child a life I never had. I couldn't sacrifice his future. I couldn't sacrifice mine. I didn't want to give that baby a difficult life while their parents lived paycheck to paycheck, never knowing if there would be food on the table. So, I chose to let it only experience the warmth and love I could provide while I was still carrying it. I carry the test with me every day, no matter where I go. There is not a day that goes by when I don't think about them. If he had said he wanted it, I would have never scheduled that appointment. I know she would have been a girl. She had the start of a heartbeat, and I took that from her. I don't think I can heal from that. Story 74. I would say a long-standing challenge for me is my parents' divorce when I was 6. Currently, my job demands a lot from me, often resulting in sleepless nights, high stress, and a tough work environment. Story 75. Being cheated on after believing she absolutely loved me was devastating. She was with me all the time when she wasn't at work, excited to see me every day for 10 years. I thought I hit the jackpot. It was wonderful, and we always had a good time. Then something happened, and she became messy. It turns out she had relationships with other managers at work, former coworkers who came to my house for dinner several times, and an ex which lasted for at least 6 of the 10 years. I never knew. It was bliss while it lasted. Until the day she broke up with me. She was as excited to see me as she was in the first month of our relationship. I will never experience that kind of affection again. It was incredibly good long-term affection, and I trusted her completely. No one can surpass that level of affection for me. Story 76. Staying at home and attending college immediately after high school while majoring in a challenging field like chemistry, pre-pharmacy, was the biggest mistake of my life. Story 77. Type 1 diabetes was diagnosed at 38. It's not that bad, I guess, in the big picture, but it's certainly a challenge. Story 78. 2 years of starvation, sleep deprivation, social isolation, and retail work while trying to study for a bachelor's degree. Story 79. Being molested as a child by a family member caused a lot of reckless behavior in my teenage years and 20s because I didn't seek therapy. I'm better now and in a healthy relationship with someone who understands my trauma, but it still affects my ability to be intimate. Story 80. Allowing society and social media to convince me that having a baby is the best thing ever is misleading. It has negatively impacted my life, and I have never felt so overwhelmed and distressed. Story 81. I found myself in a situation while growing up where every adult who was supposed to help me ignored me, or worse. However, hyperindependence isn't all bad. Story 82. Early in my career, I encountered people who had collapsed at concerts and festivals. I was often the first on the scene, dealing with massive heart attacks, seizures, choking, and overdoses before the availability of Narcan. The shooting in Las Vegas altered my mindset. Witnessing those events live and in person was worse than the ones I was able to save. Additionally, delivering 2 babies and hydrating the crowd remains beneficial and keeps me positive. Story 83. Parents who focus mainly on how many substances they could consume often failed to consider that young children shouldn't be exposed to someone using drugs. On the positive side, I learned to cook for myself and discovered that hash bricks have a strong odor when hidden in the oven. I also found that hallucinogenic mushrooms can turn caregivers into people who may not remember your name for up to 3 days. You can ask me about my thoughts on parents who use drugs around children. Story 84. When my wife cheated on me and broke up with me, it happened 30 years ago. I still dwell on it. I know I should get over it, but I can't. Story 85. Childhood poverty, a narcissistic mother, and a midlife car accident for the cherry on top. Once I finally escaped the first 2. Every day is pain, at least before I could make money and ignore my mother. Story 86. The night I nearly fell asleep at the wheel triggered a panic attack. This panic attack caused a range of distressing symptoms, which then contributed to depression and anxiety because I had no idea why I was experiencing these frightening effects. Mental health is no joke. I was never the same after that night. Story 87. I let my dad kill himself because I couldn't be bothered to stop and talk to him for another 5 minutes while I was walking my dog. I was in a hurry to get home and talk to whatever woman I was fruitlessly chasing at the time, despite knowing he was suffering and in a bad place. I was literally 20 feet away from his front door an hour before the coroner said he shot himself in the heart. I had been there a few hours earlier and knew the miserable state he was in. Despite him saying he would be up and going to work in the morning, and despite him not leaving the apartment for a week at that point, I wanted to believe my hands were clean and everything was handled. So I just walked my dog and went home. That was June 12, 2012. Story 88. Too much LSD as a teenager affected me negatively. Marriage had a detrimental impact on my life, while divorce brought about positive changes. However, I still feel the effects of those earlier experiences. Story 89. My only child became very religious in her early 20s and cut me out of her life, as well as my grandchildren's, because I am not religious. It has been 13 years, and I will never be whole again. I raised her alone, and the pain is unbearable and relentless. Story 90. Honestly, it's ongoing. I need to proactively shift my perspective in a positive direction. When I do that, things are great, but when challenges arise, my mind turns against me. I have been through a lot, but it's my mind that holds me back. Story 91. I have been fortunate in many aspects of my life, with a supportive family upbringing, no children, and relatively good health. The relationship that changed me involved an ex-partner who had a hidden diagnosis of borderline personality disorder and a challenging upbringing. I moved out of my family home to live with her when my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer, although she has since recovered. Right from the start, my ex-partner displayed her temper, which drained me emotionally, as I am a gentle-natured person. Despite my efforts to make her happy and prevent her from throwing me out of my own house, nothing changed for 3 years. Eventually, her behavior escalated to physical violence, and fortunately, I recorded incidents to prove that I was the one being attacked. After leaving her, I experienced some of the best years of my life, despite her spreading false and damaging rumors about me for years afterward and sending others to do the same. Her repeated attempts to undermine herself ultimately led to her becoming a laughingstock. Even 3 years later, I still find myself having imaginary arguments with her. I now have the kindest girlfriend, who is the exact opposite of my ex-partner. In retrospect, I believe I have grown from my experiences. They have taught me the importance of kindness and helped me recognize narcissistic behavior, guiding me toward a partner who is not broken like she was. Story 92. My parents met the wrong people, and I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I would need to get much more specific to list all of them. Story 93. My father left when I was 2 years old and did not pay child support. Things went downhill from there, but I overcame many challenges. I have been married for 40 years this August. Story 94. My mother talks negatively about everyone in the family, community, neighborhood, and church while being kind to their faces. Story 95. Smoking cannabis. I have smoked every single day since I was about 14 or 15. I am 20 now, and I am starting to see the problems it is causing and how it is affecting my life. Story 96. Marrying the wrong person, having a child with her, she cheats on you, you forgive her, have 3 more children, then she divorces you and you pay her $1,500 in monthly child support. Story 97. When I witnessed a suicide, when I woke up to my city being bombed, having been isolated in my room immediately after school almost every day throughout my childhood and youth, hearing my biological parents screaming arguments multiple times a week for years, and when my biological father was one step away from harming me. Story 98. Being bullied from elementary school through high school affected me more than people realized. I struggled with low self-esteem, anger issues, and suicidal tendencies. I am dealing with mental health challenges that require years of therapy to overcome. Growing up as a sheltered and coddled child did not prepare me for the harsh realities of people being unkind. I understand this now, but I was not equipped to handle it when I was younger, and things did not improve as I got older. I am okay now, but I certainly was not years ago. Story 99. Alcoholism. Sometimes I wonder if I will ever truly be able to live normally. I also wonder how long I will live after the damage I have done to myself from drinking over the years. Story 100. When I was 16, I was driving on US Route 1 at about 60 miles per hour and looked in my rearview mirror, just in time to see a car change lanes and clip a motorcycle. This was in Florida, where there was no law requiring helmets. The motorcyclist wasn't wearing one. I saw his head hit the pavement. I'll leave it at that. I have never been on a motorcycle in my life and never will. Story 101. Being married to an alcoholic is challenging. I found my husband dead on the garage floor when I came home with my 2 young children. I am now raising my younger child, who has disruptive mood dysregulation disorder and oppositional defiant disorder, as a single mother. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.